I'm Arne Jacobsen. I'm director of the Schatz Energy Research Center at Cal Poly Humboldt. And I'm going to talk today about offshore wind's energy dimensions and its relationship to California's climate and clean energy goals. At the Schatz Center, we're engaged in work across a lot of different dimensions of offshore wind. We're doing work related to environmental issues, economic and social issues, as well as technology dimensions. I'm going to bound this talk just to some of the energy and climate components. So I'll start with some conclusions because I think that's a good way to do these things. I guess first is that California has set some fairly aggressive and I think appropriately aggressive climate and clean energy goals. And to achieve those goals, we need a diverse portfolio of low carbon electricity generation sources. So this isn't a silver bullet type situation where one technology like solar energy is going to be able to address the issue. We need a diverse portfolio. Offshore wind is a renewable energy generation source with very low life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, and it has a generation profile that's very complementary to solar power, and that's part of why it's so attractive from that perspective. In order to develop offshore wind in the Humboldt region, there would need to be a fair amount of infrastructure investment, including investment in transmission infrastructure. That infrastructure development can bring a number of benefits to the region, including improved reliability in the Humboldt Bay area. And then, of course, if this is to proceed, there's a whole range of different issues that would need to be addressed: environmental, social, cultural, economic, and others. And we're very attuned to that. So jumping into California's clean energy goals and progress, California has a target of 100% clean electricity and overall carbon neutrality by 2045. That is going to be hard, but you set targets not because they're easy, but because the challenge that we're trying to address is a hard one, and that's, I think, an appropriate set of goals, even if we don't quite get all the way there by 2045. So we're slightly above the 2021 number at this point. Around 60% of our electricity is from clean sources, but we have, as I'll show, a long way to go to get to 100%. It's not just about adding 40% more for various reasons. So to achieve the 2045 targets, we need to add an estimated 145,000 megawatts or 148 gigawatts of clean electricity generation and storage capacity. That would represent a fourfold increase in installed clean generation capacity. Where we are right now is close to this 2022 number, which is about 35,000 megawatts of installed clean generation and storage capacity. We have to get to an estimated 183,000. So massive increase. And as you can see, it's across a variety of different technologies, with utility scale solar playing a really large role, but not a unitary role in that process. So why do we need so much more clean electricity in order to do this? A big part of it is essentially the electrification of many things. Sort of the catchy way of saying it is the electrification of everything. It's not quite everything, but the idea is that you electrify industry, you electrify transportation, you electrify heating, water and space heating in buildings, because we found that electricity is an easier thing to make clean and low carbon than other ways of trying to eliminate fossil fuels that are used for so many different things. And so in a household setting, that might be your heating system, your water heating, your cooking, transportation, lawn equipment. In an industrial setting would be a different list of things, etc. But the idea is that we need to electrify a lot of that stuff in order to decarbonize in the way that we've set out. And that means a lot more renewable generation capacity. Now, this is expected to bring a wide range of benefits. In California, the estimates here are by 2045, we'd have very significant reductions in air pollution, as well as greenhouse gas emissions, large drop in gas consumption, a lot of job creation, and significant health benefits from reduced, especially from reduced air pollution. And so there's a whole range of what we would call co-benefits in addition to the climate benefit that all of this would provide. California is looking at doing this from using multiple technologies from multiple sources across the state and from sources that are outside the state. This is from the very recently released draft from the California Independent System Operator, their transmission planning process, and it shows where a lot of transmission capacity is being planned in order to be able to connect all of the new generation sources that we're looking that the state is looking to incorporate. So this isn't just something that's being thought about here in this region. It's being thought about all across the state as well as from some out-of-state sources. I'm going to go through this one quickly because I think this has already been introduced, but of course California has identified offshore wind as a renewable generation source and has set a goal of 25,000 megawatts by 2045, and has identified 2 wind areas off the coast at Humboldt and Morro Bay. I think jumping into the carbon profile of offshore wind, it's a renewable energy source with a relatively low life cycle greenhouse gas emission profile. The graph is from the National Renewable Energy Lab, and it's looking at a number of different systems across different generation sources and looking at a range of different expected emissions from each of those sources. I'm going to highlight 3, which is commercial scale or utility scale photovoltaic systems, wind energy systems, and the way they did their analysis, they grouped land-based wind and offshore wind together because the differences are not that large in terms of their carbon profiles, and natural gas. If you look at offshore wind and the emissions profile that's expected, it'd be on the order of 3 to 4% of the emissions from natural gas over the life cycle. And that, of course, the life cycle is not just the generation phase, but all of the construction, the materials, et cetera, as well as the end of life emissions. This is similar data, but just zeroing in on those 3 technologies. And so this is representative values from the analysis of many projects with an upper bound, a lower bound, and a median value based on analysis of all those. And the data that are being showed are life cycle greenhouse gas emissions intensity in grams of carbon per kilowatt hour. So you can see natural gas at around 500 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilowatt hour, solar energy being quite a bit lower, and offshore wind being even lower than that. These data are based on fixed foundation offshore wind because there's a lot more data there. There are relatively few studies of floating, but the ones that are there indicate that it's pretty similar to fixed foundation offshore wind. So from a carbon perspective, this is why there's a lot of interest in offshore wind. We also need to be thinking about the portfolio dimension. This is the generation mix from August 16th of 2023, so it's sort of a typical hot summer day in California. The yellow at the bottom shows the contribution that solar energy made to the mix. The orange above it is wind, hydro, nuclear, and other low carbon sources. And then the black above it is fossil fuel-based generation. Mostly that is natural gas. And then the green is the out-of-state imports, which are from a mix of sources. So to eliminate all of that natural gas, solar is not going to be able to do it alone. Solar has 2 main challenges, which are night and winter. And so we need a portfolio that helps balance that out. Storage can do some of it, but it can't do everything, or we would need an enormous amount of storage. Offshore wind has a daily and seasonal generation profile that complements solar power quite well. This is a graph that shows, for a given amount of installed capacity, what's the average over the course of the year that you would expect in each hour of the day. There are, of course, lots of variations from day to day and what that looks like, but you can see that offshore wind, which is the blue line, the blue solid line, extends into the evening and early morning hours and complements solar quite well. It's able to generate when solar is not. Land-based wind also does the same. Because the winds are steadier offshore, you get more per unit of installed capacity out of offshore wind than you get from land-based wind. Now, offshore wind, as I said, involves building a fair amount of new infrastructure. We think of it as four main large endeavors: the wind farms themselves, but also the port infrastructure that's needed for assembly and operations and maintenance, the electric transmission infrastructure, and component supply chains. Thinking about it from an energy perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about the transmission side of things. We recognize that each of these four types of infrastructure involve their own set of developers and their own set of regulatory and permitting processes, and they each have their own environmental, socioeconomic, cultural resource, and technology-related issues. So there is a fair amount of complexity to what is being proposed, and it's a lot to engage with. So just focusing a little on the transmission side of things, the transmission infrastructure in this region is fairly limited. The picture here shows our little baby transmission line that serves this region in an area where it runs under some large-scale 500 kilovolt transmission lines over in the Cottonwood area. And that gives you a sense of the change in scale that is needed to provide the transmission. The output of a large-scale wind farm would be probably more than 20 times the export capacity of the existing transmission infrastructure serving Humboldt County. So there would need to be a fair amount of investment to be able to deliver this at scale. The California Independent System Operator, which is responsible for transmission planning in the region, recently released a recommendation for transmission to support offshore wind. The one-line diagram here, it shows what their main recommendation was. They are proposing two large-scale 500 kilovolt transmission lines connecting Humboldt to the wider California grid, tapping in at two different locations, one primarily to the east and the other to the southeast, and also including a connection between that new system and the local Humboldt system. So that's the proposal that was just released. Comments are due on that plan on the 23rd. So if people are interested in that, the California ISO has a website where comments can be submitted. The estimated cost of the new infrastructure is on the order of $3 to $4.5 billion. There's of course some uncertainty, but that's the range that is being given. I think it's useful to think a little bit about what kind of benefits having that arrangement would provide in this region. One, of course, is that it would provide access to clean electricity from offshore wind farms. The added transmission capacity would allow for regional load growth. There'd be additional capacity here in the Humboldt Bay region. And it would also lead to improved electricity reliability due to the increased capacity and the associated redundancy of connections. Now, importantly, those benefits would be primarily in the Humboldt Bay region. There are some communities that are served by lines that radiate out from Humboldt Bay, and the reliability issues on those lines are primarily associated with issues on those lines themselves, and this wouldn't necessarily address those. I think there's other strategies to address those, and those are things that we have been actively working on. There would be reduced local air and water pollution from the retirement of combustion-based power plants. The Humboldt Bay Generating Station, which is natural gas fired, I think could be, its use could either be greatly reduced or entirely eliminated over time with based on the transmission connections. And then in relationship to the transmission development, there would be some jobs and economic activity. Most of that would happen during the construction phase, although there are some operation and maintenance jobs associated with transmission as well. I think just moving to sum up, this is actually back to the same conclusions I started with. California has set aggressive climate and clean energy targets. We need a diverse portfolio of clean generation sources in order to meet those targets. Offshore wind is a renewable energy resource that can contribute, and it has a very low life cycle greenhouse gas profile. The transmission that could be developed, as well as offshore wind itself, can bring regional benefits, both from a electricity reliability perspective and from a capacity perspective, as well as from an economic dimension. But if this is to proceed, there are a number of other issues that need to be considered and addressed. There are a number of challenges, as I think other speakers will speak to, and as some of the other work that we're doing indicates. And those things, of course, would have to be addressed in order for this to proceed in the manner that we would want. I guess at the Schatz Center, when we think about the energy transition that we need to make, we recognize that it's hugely important to decarbonize our energy system. We also, at the same time, have to do it in a way that makes that energy system more resilient to the challenges that climate change and other natural disasters are throwing at us. And we need to do that in a way that is more equitable and inclusive than has been done in the past. And we need to do all those three things at once. That is hard, but it is what is needed. And so that's how we're thinking about this. Thank you.
I think we have time for just a couple of quick questions, if we have any out there for Arne.
Over there.
I see two.
Thank you for your presentation. I do have a question that's related. Have you looked at if this entire project is going to increase population in this area? And if so, how those folks are going to be housed?
So that is an issue. I don't have a definitive answer on that. I do think that offshore wind would be a major economic driver or a major driver for economic development in the region, and that it likely would result in some increase in population. And I think there is recognition that housing is a major dimension of that, or a major constraint. There's other constraints as well. Healthcare is, healthcare services are another that has to be thought about and addressed. So do I have an answer exactly how that will happen now? No, but it is something that we've spent a little bit of time thinking about, and I know others are thinking about as well. So I think it's a really important issue that has to be considered. There was a question here, and then there's another person here.
Thank you. I'd like to point out that nuclear energy has a highest carbon footprint of any non-fossil fuel energy source, a good percentage of that through the uranium enrichment process, just because almost all the nuclear fuel coming to U.S. commercial nuclear power facilities come from the southern part of the old Soviet Union. They're getting most of the carbon spewing there, but now they're, while it's fine to bring certain industries back to the U.S., bringing the nuclear industry, more of the nuclear industry back to the U.S., especially with this high assay, low enriched uranium process and plans for breeder reactors. Anyway, it certainly won't help indigenous people, which we seemingly care about around here, around the Four Corners, Black Hills, and many other areas. So have you, I imagine you haven't looked into the details of international carbon footprint for U.S. nuclear industry. And also I question whether they say emission-free electric vehicles, but that's just that's because no tailpipe, not that there's not emissions elsewhere. So I hope those other aspects are considered. Thanks.
Yeah, so the life cycle analysis framework does consider emissions from the entire cycle. I'm not advocating for nuclear energy. I just happen to put up some numbers that relate to someone else's analysis associated with that. But the life cycle assessment framework does consider the full life cycle, including the mining part of the cycle, which is relevant to electric vehicles as well as to nuclear energy, as well as storage and a range of other technologies.